Hey everybody, how you doing? Hope you're doing well. Trying to adjust the light here so I look good. I'm here at my office in Satterfield today because I had some other work I had to do, and Charlie was too much of a distraction. So no Charlie sighting today. Today I want to wrap up our discussion of the Hunger Games and mythology elements in the Hunger Games by touching on uh, the last couple of discussion questions, analysis questions that you guys did for last week's take-home quiz. So I've compiled all those, and they are in Canvas, and we're going to go to that in a little bit. And I'm just going to kind of review and summarize some of the things you guys said. I enjoyed reading your comments as always, and I ended up agreeing with a lot of what you said. And so we're going to cover that and go over that, talk about that a little bit. Then I want to give you a brief uh, preview of folk tales. This is the last genre of the three that we put together: mythology, fairy tales, and folk tales. And folk tales are very, very similar and related to the other two, as we will see. So there's not a whole lot new I can share there, except to say that folk tales, unlike fairy tales, which are purposely vaguely set. So fairy tales, as we mentioned, one of the characteristics of fairy tales is there's a very vague setting. Time and place is very vague. But in folk tales, obviously, that's one of the main attractions of folk tales, the fact that each one is set in a very specific place and in some cases time. And every country around the world, every area, region of the world has its share of folk tales. And the folk tales do what myths do and do what fairy tales do. So a lot of the characteristics are the same. A lot of the criteria is the same. Among other things, they're very entertaining. They can teach lessons, but they have the added benefit, as I said, of introducing us to other cultures. Or perhaps if a child knows that their family comes from a particular area of the world, they might be particularly interested in that type of folk tale. And there should be no shortage of examples in each area where they could look for and find those. So I guess I just did introduce folk tales. Like I said, there's not a whole lot new to add to that. They are very much related. So the same criteria, the same kinds of things we look for in folk tales, I'm sorry, in fairy tales and also in mythology, we'll find those elements in folk tales, but with the added benefit of being set in a particular time and place, region, society, in some cases, religion. So, among other things, reading folk tales from different parts of the world inform us about different cultures, which is always a good thing. All right, and then after having done that, and there are a couple really good websites that I will kind of share with you briefly, and you can check those out on your own, that talk about folk tales and also give some examples of folk tales for kids. There is an assignment that's due by Wednesday at midnight. Oh, by the way, let me throw a number at you. Number 10 will be our first number, number 10. I will explain the folktale assignment that I'm going to ask you to do and have that turned in by Wednesday at midnight. So you're going to have an opportunity to experience some folk tales on your own, of your own choosing. And so I'm going to explain that today as well. So that's what's on tap for today. I usually like to start, though, as a wrap up to a discussion of the Hunger Games. I have a hypothetical situation that I always throw out to students in a classroom, and I'll do it to you. We won't have a chance to go back and forth on this, but I'll just pose these questions to you. My hypothetical situation is I'm a TV producer, and I've come up with this idea that's very similar to the Hunger Games. All right, what we'll do, it's very similar to Survivor and other shows of that ilk, in that we will take 50 volunteers from around the country. So they are volunteers. So that's one of the things that makes it different than the Hunger Games. Obviously, the Hunger Games, they pulled your name out of a hat or whatever. So people volunteer for this. Americans can volunteer for this. And after a series of interviews and tryouts and so on, we will decide, the producers will decide what 50 contestants we want to choose out of the people who volunteer or who try out, I guess you would say, across the country. Would pick 50 for various reasons, maybe because we think they're the most qualified or the strongest, or maybe we just think they're interesting. And then we'll take them and we'll put them in, like the Hunger Games, some deserted island or some forest area or someplace that will be difficult to survive in. And then, like the Hunger Games, it's a fight to the death. So 50 people fighting to the death until there's one winner. And in my scenario, the winner, the final survivor, wins $50 million, tax-free, $50 million, a lot of money. All right, so that's my scenario. Now, again, there are certain holes in the scenario that students always point out. Certainly, we'd have to sign waivers, so there wouldn't be lawsuits or whatever. We're talking about murder. Now, again, this is real killing. This is not fake. It's not phony. It's not fiction. This is actually going to be happening live. It's live television. So very similar to the Hunger Games. One difference is, we're not going to make you watch, in the Hunger Games, you got the sense that there was like one channel and everybody had to watch this thing. No, we'll just have it on one channel. I always joke that it would probably be on Fox, and Ryan Seacrest would probably be the host of this thing. But anyway, that's my scenario. Now, here's a couple of questions I have, and we usually kick this around in class, but I'll just toss them out to you. Number one, would you watch this show that I'm producing? Would you watch this? It's a weekly show, live. Whoops, I just messed up my lighting. Speaking about producing, I need to produce better. Would you watch Americans kill Americans until there was one winner? 50, and this is real life killing. And again, it would be like the Hunger Games. They'd have basic weapons. It's not like anybody had a submachine gun or a bazooka or whatever. It'd be really rough, and it'd be tough watching. Another provision of my games, which is very different than Hunger Games, is that everybody would have to be 21. So we're not talking about kids. So we're not going to have kids killing kids. These are all adults and they're all volunteers. So nobody's making anybody do this. Would you watch? Now, in a classroom of about 30 people, usually I would get about 25 people who would say, no, Shank, oh my God, that's so horrible. I would never watch that. That's horrifying. People killing each other, that's not what I consider entertainment. But there's always a few, and again, maybe out there watching me right now are thinking, yeah, I might watch that. And like any good dystopian scenario, my scenario, I think, helps, I don't know, reveal something about our society or our culture. The fact that some people might actually watch this for entertainment. And my second question that's related to that is, whether or not you would watch it or not, do you think a lot of people would watch it? And almost universally, everybody agrees with me. I think, oh my God, this would have the biggest rating. My show, it would make me $1 zillion. This show would be the biggest thing on television. It had the biggest rating. It'd be bigger than the Super Bowl, be bigger than anything that's ever been shown on television. Everybody, well, I won't say everybody, because a lot of people, maybe you would say, I'm sorry, Shank, I wouldn't watch it. But you have to admit, I think it would be very, very popular and have a great rating. And again, like any dystopian scenario, it poses the question, what does that say about us as a society? And I'm not going to pass any judgment, but again, I think it would be very, very popular. A lot of people would tune in. I mean, we've never seen anything like this before. Maybe just basically out of rank curiosity, people might watch. But I think a lot of people would watch. And then we could do a whole discussion, which we don't have time to do, but you might think about that and answer it on your own. What does that say about us as a society? Or maybe, I don't want to just make it an American thing. I think, you do this any country, it'd be the same thing. It's like more of a human nature thing. So I'm not picking on America as such, but I'm just saying I'm setting it in our country. My God, I think it would be very popular. All right, next question is, would you volunteer? Would you be one of the people who would try out to be the 50 who are chosen for this? And I envision it'd be kind of like American Idol, where the first couple weeks of the show would just be going to major cities in the country and seeing how many people tried out in different major cities across the country, and each one of them be interviewed, and maybe they'd show some of their skills or whatever, and we get to know them as people and their backstories and so on. Um, would you volunteer? Now, almost universally, the answer to that question, when I ask it to a group of college students, is no. No, Shank, I would not try this. You know, yeah, 50, I could use 50 million, but no, not to risk my life. Let's face it, I got a 1 in 50 chance. And I'm kind of like PETA. I'm not particularly strong, or I don't have a lot of survival skills. So no, I'll pass. I'll pass. It's tempting, but I'll pass. So most people say no to this. But the next question is whether you would try out or not. Do you think a lot of people would? And again, the universal question, or the universal answer to this is, yeah. I think that's true. I think, like I said, in every major city that have tryouts, I think there'd be lines around the building of people who would want to try out to be one of the 50, and probably most likely be one of the 49 who get killed, all in pursuit of that $50 million. And again, like a good scenario of dystopia, what does that tell us about our society? And again, I think we'd probably all agree that there'd be no shortage of volunteers. It's not like you'd go around from major city to major city and the hallways would be empty. There'd be a lot of people. It'd be hard to pick 50 out of, my God, hundreds, thousands, whatever. And again, what does that tell us? And the side question is, who would volunteer? If it wouldn't be you, and most of you are young people in college, you have your lives ahead of you, you have hopes and dreams, and but what would it say? I mean, who would volunteer? What kind of people? Well, and I think the answer to that question is, first of all, a lot of, I don't know, mentally disturbed people who think that they would actually have a chance to win. That's a disturbing thought. That's a disturbing commentary on our society. I think another group of individuals who we'd see a lot of, and this is a sad commentary, it would probably be those people who we have trained in the military. These would be ex-Army Marines, whatever, who were trained to kill, who have the skills, and then did their time, and then came back home as civilians. And now, I don't know, they're store managers at Acme making just a little bit over minimum wage, and they look at this opportunity and say, hey, you know what, I was trained to do this. I was trained to kill $50 million versus a career as a manager at Acme. I don't know. I think that's a sad commentary. We could talk about how poorly we treat our veterans after they come back from service. This is part of it. And then finally, this is maybe the saddest commentary of all. I have a feeling most of the people who would volunteer would be those people, those Americans, our fellow citizens, who feel like their lives are just so meaningless and have no hope and no opportunity and no chance at advancement. And they look ahead to the rest of their lives and they say, what the hell? I might as well do this. I mean, I think you guys would say, no, I wouldn't do that, because you have dreams. Like I said, you have hopes and dreams and aspirations, and you have a reason to live, and you'll probably never make $50 million in your lifetime, but you'll live a satisfying life with joy and happiness and dreams that you'll accomplish and be able to. So you'd pass on the opportunity because chances are, you'd die. But there'd be a lot of people who wouldn't take that opportunity, who would say instead, no, this is my life. This is as good as it's going to get. I might as well. That's a sad commentary. All right, and then the last question I usually pose, I always get some interesting answers to this. I don't know how many of you have siblings, but let's say you do. If you have a sibling and they were chosen for being a tribute, would you, like Katniss did, volunteer in their stead? Would you say, no, 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 pick me instead. I don't want my sister to go, or I don't want my brother to go. I'm always curious to see how many people would say, yes, I would do that. Um, I think that's an interesting question. It says a lot about your situation in life, or how you feel about your siblings. I don't know. So would you go, no, I don't want my sister. I'll go in her stead, or I'll go in my brother's place. Or would you be more, would you be more like, good luck, bro. I'll be pulling for you. Good luck, sis. You know, hey, can I have your bedroom after you're gone? I mean, no. Um, it's kind of interesting how people answer that question. Sorry to make it light, but sometimes you have to make it light. It's such a depressing story. So anyway, that's my hypothetical Hunger Games situation. Second number is 17. 17. All right, the next thing I wanted to cover is I asked you a couple of analysis questions for the homework, and we did a couple of them last period, and I said I was going to save a few more for today, so let's do that. And I compiled all these. And I ask you, and what I did is I compiled your answers to really the last couple of questions. I ask you, are there any other role models that are really good for young girls besides Katniss? And a lot of great answers to that. I also ask you, what are some other works for kids that include classical archetypes like the Hunger Games does? A lot of great answers to that. And then I also ask you about your personal criticisms of the book. And there were some interesting answers to that. Just to sort of summarize, as I'll kind of, I mean, you can read all this on your own. Again, I'm not going to make this something you're responsible for the midterm or whatever, but again, I thought the answers were good. Role models that you mentioned, and I probably should have said, usually give me some examples other than what can be found in Harry Potter, because I found myself reading about Hermione and Harry Potter again and again. But of course, a lot of people mention Hermione, Mulan, Merida, Asaka Tano from Star Wars, Clone Wars. We had Nancy Drew mentioned, which I kind of like to hear. That goes back to my era. Boys read Hardy Boys, and the girls read Nancy Drew back in the day. Wonder Woman, Princess Fiona, Hermione again, Cora from The Legend of Korra. That was a really good example. Princess Leia, great example, classic example. Matilda, Ella from Ella Enchanted, Coraline, Anne of Green Gables, somebody mentioned, which is a classic. It was nice to see that one mentioned. Ramona Quimby, Professor McGonagall from Harry Potter. That's a great example. Six from I Am Number Four. Max from Maximum Ride. Laura and Mary Ingalls from the Little House on the Prairie series. That's another classic, been around for a long time. Maybe some of you are familiar with that. And Mary Poppins was mentioned. I have not seen the recent remake of Mary Poppins, but I remember when the first Mary Poppins came out, it was very popular and people loved that. That was a great movie. So there are no shortage, thankfully, of good role models for girls. And I'll stop that share for a second and share this website with you. Just sort of as an FYI, top 10 role models books. And if you go sideways, they give you the top 10. But what I liked about this website is that they kind of present to you, and these are mostly children's books, obviously. A lot of them look like they're picture books. So if you're interested in finding other works that would be really good role models for girls, and again, this is one of the wonderful trends in recent children's literature in the last 20 years. There have been a real boom in books that feature females as protagonists, which is a very, very good thing. I will note that a lot of these are biographical in nature, actually deal with real life people. either living or no longer with us. We're going to talk more about biography at the end of the semester. So, for example, a book like She Persisted is really a collection of stories dealing with women or girls who made a change, real life people. So this is nonfiction, not fiction. Rosa Parks again. So a lot of these are based in fact. This one looks interesting. Susie's Kimono, that looks like that might be a folktale as well as involving a female main character. Harriet the Spy, Matilda was mentioned. We already mentioned that one. And again, Hidden Figures, based on three wonderful women who helped the space program. And you know what? When that movie came out, you know, I'm a child of the 60s, and I thought I knew everything there was to know about the space program. I didn't know about this. I didn't know what an important contribution they made. So I learned something. Maya Angelou obviously was a real life woman, women in science. But again, Pride and Prejudice. Malala's Magic Pencil. That might be fictional. It sounds like she's writing a picture book there. Stephanie's Ponytail. Cloth Lullaby. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, of course, a very inspirational figure. But then mixed with the biographies are fiction, which is what we're more interested in right now. Olivia, that's a great picture book. Love that. And you can load more too. So, you know, if you're thinking about this as maybe a topic for your final paper, you know, generally speaking, role models for girls and how they're portrayed in fiction, no shortage of really good examples. I guess I can do this. This is what they consider to be the top 10. Amelia Earhart, of course, I think everybody's familiar with that story. Okay, so you'll find that in Canvas, FYI. So your role models were well chosen. And if you're interested in pursuing that as a topic or just for your own reading, or I know some of you are teaching children, and if you're looking for really good books that girls particularly would be interested in. But you know what? I shouldn't even put it that way. You know, share it with the boys too. Let them be aware that, you know, girls and women make strong contributions to our world and our society. This shouldn't just be books that girls should read. I mean, boys should read them too. Maybe boys should read them even more so than girls. So I'll get off my soapbox there, but it just occurred to me I was being sexist there. All right, let's throw another number at you, 31. Third number is 31. All right, going back to, I guess we don't need to go back to it. Your comments on criticisms of the book. And a number of you said, I really don't have any criticisms. I really enjoyed the book, which was nice to read. But I'm always curious to know if there were criticisms, what were they? And here are a couple of the more interesting or commonly made points. You know, some of you mentioned it is awful violent, which it is. And of course, that makes the question of age appropriateness, I think, very, very important. Somebody else made a very, very good point about this. They wrote that one of the problems they had with the book was that Collins seems to try to, you know, straddle the line between child readers and young adult readers. And it's kind of like she tried to write it so that she could appeal to both. And as a result, maybe the writing suffered. And the student made, I think, a very interesting point and a very valid point that maybe the book might have been more effective had she just aimed it at a young adult audience. And therefore, the writing could have been a little bit more mature and a little bit more detailed and maybe even a little bit more disturbing. I mean, she really does downplay all the violence. I mean, she's created this horrific scenario, but then she's trying to present it to children when maybe it would have been better just to say, look, this is going to be for young adults. But I guess the argument I would make, it's not an argument against it, this is a point I would make on the other side, is that I think most kids when they first read The Hunger Games, they're in grade school. They're kids who read this. I imagine if you read it before, the first time you read it, you were probably in grade school, so you're technically children. Um, but I thought that was a really interesting point and a good one. Maybe she should have, instead of trying to please everybody, she should have just focused on, one group or another. And the fact that I teach this book both in children's lit and lit for young adults, I don't know, I think kind of helps make her point a little bit, or the student's point. So I appreciated that. Somebody brought up, was the love interest really necessary? But I think the student kind of answered their own point there, by saying, I think the student said, but I realize that we are aiming this series of books at a young adult reader, so you're going to have to play up maybe some love interest. And of course, there's a love triangle between her and Peta and Gail that will develop in the later books. So, but that was a criticism. A couple of people criticized Katniss as a character or her personality. Some called her annoying. Some said she kind of had a lack of personality. But actually, and I've heard that criticism before, and I'll answer that. And again, I'm not saying you're wrong, but you are. No, okay. But I would say that one of the things I liked about this book is that she's not perfect. She's what we would call in other classes I do. We don't really do it in children's lit, but she's what I would call, she has elements of the anti-hero. Certainly she's a heroic character, but she's also, I mean, she's not perfect. She's a little rough around the edges. She's not really particularly personable. She doesn't have a lot of friends. She's blunt and outspoken and not particularly likable. And I actually, ironically, I kind of like that about the character. She wasn't perfect. She wasn't goody two shoes. She didn't always do the right thing. She was selfish at times. So that would be my answer to that. I mean, if you don't like her as a character, I mean, I understand that, but I personally kind of liked how that was written. Instead of making her this icon of goodness, it makes her more relatable too. It's kind of hard to relate to somebody who's perfect, but it's easier to relate to somebody who has flaws and shows them on occasion. So anyway, and then there was one other point that I thought was really interesting, and I went, yes, because whenever I bring this up in class, people just shake their heads and say, Shank, what's wrong with you? Somebody brought up the fact that, they're headed for almost certain death. There's only going to be one winner. So when they go to, the Capitol, they partake of all this wonderful food and drink and whatever. And as you would do, because you're thinking, tomorrow the games begin and chances are I'm going to be dead. So I'm going to make the most of my time here. And the student brought this up and thought it was kind of unrealistic. And it's children's lit, but I'm going to bring it up anyway. It's kind of unrealistic that they don't have sex, and my point was always, when Katniss and Peta are on top of that building, it's the night before the Hunger Games begin, and they're kind of contemplating things. It's kind of like, I always joke, I'm kind of disappointed in Peta. I mean, it's like, there they are. It's the night before the Hunger Games. Wouldn't you at least, I don't know, make a move? It's Jennifer Lawrence, for crying out loud. But there's none of that. So just a little joke there. But when I read that, I thought, yes, there's at least one person who doesn't think I'm weird when I bring that up. Yeah, come on, Katniss. Tomorrow we're probably going to be killed. So, so anyway, sorry about that. I had to interject that. All right, the next thing I wanted to do is just briefly prepare you for folk tales. And like I said, not a whole lot new I can introduce because folk tales share so many qualities and characteristics of both mythological tales and particularly fairy tales. I think one way you might describe folk tales is that folk tales are really fairy tales, but set in particular times and places around the world. But just as kind of an introduction, there are a couple of websites that I will share with you. And plus, you read some things in the packet that help define what a folktale is. So hopefully you read those. Here's a really good website, and it's in the Canvas, basically answering the question, what is a folktale? And you can click on the common characteristics of folktales. And here's a nice summary. And like I said, if you'll notice, a lot of these kind of mirror what we say about fairy tales. These are stories that were shared orally for generations. Very straightforward, simple plots. Like fairy tales, they're told very economically with simple characters. There's one central conflict or problem that's solved. Helps demonstrate decision making, reinforces consequences, takes place in natural surroundings, highlights shared values or moral lessons. But again, what makes a folktale is that it is set, whether it's in Africa or Asia or America, Canada, maybe it's a Buddhist tale or a Christian tale or a Jewish tale. All the tales do reflect back to their origins. And again, if you wanted to click on some other thing, why are folktales important? What is a folktale? Folktale for kids. All right, we did that. And then the other one I'll share with you, and this is also in Canvas. Again, a lot of them do share lessons. There are themes to these stories, many of them. And by theme, I mean lessons, messages, morals to the story. And again, take note that folklore is completely different than folk tales. While fairy tales and fables are other versions of folk tales, cultural heritage produced folklore stories, which also often include scary legends. Origin of folk tales. And then this is kind of nice if you're interested in particular types of folk tales, areas. Here are some of the more popular folk tales originating in Europe with an explanation. Again, a lot of us are familiar with Aesop's fables, Lord Riding Hood, etc. Pied Piper, Chicken Little, Little Mermaid, Ugly Duckling. Also, if you'll note that a lot of these became Disney-fied over the last 30, 40, 50 years. And I had you read some articles about that. A lot of controversy about that. I think I might talk a little bit more about that in our class for Thursday. Jack and the Beanstalk. And then you have some of the more popular folk tales from Asia. So one of the things that's good about folk tales, if you're a teacher, is if you are, I don't know, teaching your kids about particular areas of the world and its history, you can also intermix them with the stories of that particular area. Here's some of the more popular North American folk tales, including America, obviously. I think we're all familiar with Johnny Appleseed and Paul Bunyan. Of course, The Wizard of Oz. My God, everybody's seen that. All right. So those are some really good examples of folk tales and some definitions of what folk tales are. And again, the difference between folk tales and fairy tales is very thin. How about another number? How about fifth number will be 67. 67 is our number. Okay, so you've read about folk tales. I've sort of introduced them here today. So let me explain to you what I'm going to ask you to do for homework. And I'll put up, first of all, the entire assignment for, well, Thursday, before Thursday's class, Wednesday by midnight. All right, so as usual, watch this lecture and take note of the numbers in sequence. You need to do that and turn that in for the homework. Readings in the packet, I'd like you to take a look at 119 to 144. It says the Folktale website. Well, I've actually kind of already highlighted that, so you can go back over that and take a look at that. Also, I'm going to ask you to take a look at the midterm preview, because the midterm, we are going to be taking that Monday. And it's going to be a timed exam, and I'm going to talk more about the midterm for Thursday's lecture, so make sure you watch that, because we're at midterm time. Things are going along pretty quickly. So please look that over. And then, as it says, do the folktale assignment in Canvas, which I'm about to go over. And also, if you are, I think there's 3 students, might be 4, but I think it's only 3. If you are one of the 3 students who are in the folktale, fairy tale, or myth presentations, those are also due by midnight on Wednesday. And I will compile those and put those on Canvas so the rest of the students can read those, because that will be part of what everybody will be responsible for the midterm. So do the reading. If you're in the folktale, fairy tale, myth presentation group, your written presentation of a folktale, fairy tale, myth of your choice is due. And then everybody will be required to do the folktale assignment in Canvas, which I am now going to share with you. All right. A couple of years ago, during COVID, when everything was online, I came up with this idea because we couldn't meet in class to look over picture books or folk tales, which I usually have. What I did instead is, you'll see here, there are all kinds of YouTube videos, animated cartoons in most cases, which tell folk tales and present folk tales from various places around the world. And so I've included the links for all these. I did not double check to make sure all these are still available. I checked a few, they look like they're all available. So what I'm going to ask you to do, and I tried to pick a wide cross section, so you're going to see some folk tales from America, but some from other countries as well. I would encourage you to pick a few maybe that you're not familiar with, just to broaden your perspective a little bit. But for any 2 of these, so I'm going to ask you to do 2. Read through, and actually you're actually going to watch these because they're YouTube videos. And most of them don't last very long. Like I said, most folk tales are relatively short, so the video will be relatively short. I don't think most of them run longer than 10 minutes. So identify the origins. In other words, tell me where it came from. And also summarize the plot of the story in your own words. Then, what are some of the potential themes in the story? Are there lessons to be learned? Are there messages, morals, lessons? And I'm willing to bet there are. And if they're not, then you might kind of comment on that, whether or not that makes, I don't know, the story maybe lacking something. Then also, I'd like you in a few sentences to analyze whether or not you think this work, and a lot of these go back many, 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 many years. Talk about whether or not you still think it would be appropriate and relevant to children today. Or for whatever reason or reasons, is it so outdated or politically incorrect, or for whatever reason you might say, no, I really don't think children of today would relate to this for whatever reason. Then explain that. So whether or not, if you think it is relevant and appropriate, then praise it and tell me why. If you don't think it would be appropriate or relevant, explain your reasons for that. And then finally, the last question, do you think there are any weaknesses in either the story itself, or you might do a little criticism of the video presentation. Now, we're not talking about picture books with art. This is media. These will be videos. So, but you can criticize the media and the video, maybe perhaps like you would a picture book, with a style of art effective? Was the music appropriate? I mean, there's all different kinds of things you can comment on as far as the video goes. So do those 5 points for any 2 of the listed folk tales. And then this is kind of fun. And it's not as easy as it might seem to be. For each one of the folk tales, come up with a rhyme to remember, a 2-line rhyme that sums up each story character or the moral of the story, making it easy for a child to remember. Okay, so that would be the last thing you do for each folk tale. And again, I tried to pick a variety of, oh, by the way, disregard this. We've already kind of done this. So all of these links are what you should focus on. And again, I tried to take them, or if you can think of others, other folk tales that you're familiar with that you would rather do this for, and maybe you find a YouTube video, animated version of a particular story and you want to do that instead, by all means, do another one. I'm always happy to add to my list here. And again, this will be in written form that you will turn in by midnight on Wednesday. All right. Last number is 88. 88. So we had 6 numbers today. And that's it. That's really all I have for today. So well, I'm doing this actually on Sunday afternoon. So enjoy the first part of your week. We'll see you again on Thursday. If you have any, obviously, at any time, if you have any questions or issues, let me know. And if you're starting to have questions about the midterm, save those. Like I said, I'm going to be talking about the midterm and explaining the midterm preview. It's like a study guide, basically, for the midterm. I'll be talking about that in Thursday's video. And then we're going to take the midterm. When I say we're going to take it, you're not going to, I'm not going to take it. You're going to take it. I'm going to grade it. We're going to do that at the beginning of the week next week. So, but I'll be talking more about that on Thursday's video. All right. So have a great time. Have a great day and a great first part of your week. And we will see you on Thursday, maybe with Charlie.